Now, I'm not saying that there are not many Roman Catholics who genuinely were concerned and appalled about that kind of slaughter of the church that was going on, and of course, many Roman Catholics were also killed by the Bolsheviks. But I don't think we should lose sight too of the nimbleness of Vatican diplomacy, which is a very real thing, as you know, and its designs on the religious future in Russia. In any case, the Stalin and Trotsky had this falling out. Stalin, who originally was a very underestimated member of the Soviet leadership, he was a Georgian. He was not considered as somebody who really would have much of a claim to leadership. There was obviously a lot of Jewish people in the leadership of Trotsky, of course, but Zinoviev, Kamenev, Radek, many of these other people who were considered much more capable, much stronger intellectual lights than Stalin was. But Stalin was...
He was a seminary washout, right?
He was, there's conflicting stories about how he ended up out of the seminary, whether he left because of his Marxist principles, or whether he was a washout, or whether he had personality problems, or maybe he thought, bank robbing was a more lucrative career path. But in any case, he seemed to have a kind of let's say less of a high intellectual academic talent like some of the other Bolshevik leaders, and more of, you might call, a criminal cunning. In other words, he was, in fact, reportedly, his favorite movies were American gangster movies. He loved those movies because he really kind of liked that style of leadership. And so there's, and there's, frankly, I think there's a kind of a human quality to that. If you look at a guy like Lenin, who in many respects seemed to have very, very atrophied human characteristics. He even wrote once that he hated to listen to music because music would cause you to have warm, loving emotions like wanting to pat a child on the head. And he thought that was a terrible thing, and that would make you deviate from your revolutionary path. Whereas I think Stalin, in his own brutal way, was like a big crime boss, like a conventional tyrant.
Yeah, he's like a Tony Soprano. And then I remember reading, I was reading about, there's a great book by Richard Wurmbrand, Marx and Satan, and I think it may have some, but I have a bio of Lenin too, and I think in the biography of Lenin there was something about him writing poetry to Satan, and he wished that he could blow up the entire universe. It's like, who says they want to blow up the entire universe? And then I think towards his latter days, he ended up just, they said that they would wheel him out in his wheelchair and he would howl at the moon. Lenin. I'm serious.
Now, one of the interesting things about Stalin, once he had won his battle with Trotsky was forced to flee the Soviet Union. He took refuge in Mexico. And in fact, then he was assassinated in Mexico in 1940 by a Soviet agent by the name of Ramon Mercado, I believe was a Spaniard. Mexico doesn't have the death penalty, so I think he served out his 25-year sentence, and then left, went back to the Soviet Union, split his time between Cuba and the Soviet Union, got a medal. The Soviets were loyal to their people, and he was a family friend. He killed him with an ice axe, an ice axe, mountain climbing axe. I think there's something humorous about that. Whoever heard of an alpine axe in Mexico City? Anyway, it's so he did, but then. Yes, go ahead.
Well, there's speculation about every event in history, but some people speculate that maybe it wasn't Stalin that had Trotsky killed. Trotsky might have actually been a German agent. This kind of stuff. Have you heard this kind of stuff?
I haven't heard about that. Of course, in a sense, they were all German agents when they came into Russia in the first place, and into the revolutionary situation in 1917. After Trotsky left, Stalin, in a sense, stole many aspects of Trotsky's policies in terms of radical transformation of the Soviet economy, collectivization of agriculture, which killed several million people. The estimates vary, but we're talking about maybe 10 million people that died as a result. And contrary, and I know this is going to be controversial, contrary to what the Ukrainian nationalists say about the Holodomor, this was not just Ukraine. It wasn't a national thing. It was basically crushing the agricultural sector and the free peasant farmers Obviously Ukraine was very hard hit because it was a major agricultural area, but so were parts of Russia, parts of Kazakhstan. It was a disaster for the whole agricultural. But what it was designed to do, and in fact did do, is divert a lot of resources from agriculture into heavy industry, which is what Stalin wanted to do. The other thing that we should keep in mind, of course, in 1933, when Hitler came to the power in Germany, I think Stalin began to believe that war with Germany was increasingly likely. He also was a very keen student of what Hitler's behavior was in Germany, and I think what he took great note in 1934, the Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler assassinated Ernst Röhm and a lot of the leadership of the Sturmabteilung to establish his mastery within the party. Eliminated, you might say, to some extent, the left wing of the Nazi Party, the socialist part of the National Socialist Party. A lot of these people, many of whom, by the way, were former communists. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of communists who defected to the Nazis, and not too long before they came to power. And Stalin saw this, and I think he saw that as a model for his own turning of terror, which had up to that point been primarily used by the Bolsheviks against segments of the population they thought could pose potential resistance. Shoot all the priests, shoot the policemen, shoot the army officers, crush the independent peasantry. But for the first time now, Stalin turned the terror against the party apparatus itself. So that means he accused all the old Bolsheviks like Zinoviev, Kamenev. He even executed his own police chief, Genrikh Yagoda, accused them of being German agents, had them tortured, put on trial, and shot. And by the way, there's a little vignette. Genrikh Yagoda, who was a very brutal murderer, head of the NKVD, where I guess it was maybe it's still GPU. Anyway, whatever its previous incarnation was. Supposedly, once before, not long before he was executed, somebody asked him if he believed in God. And he said, so he's sitting there in the Lubyanka getting ready to be shot. And he says, for all of my service to Stalin, I deserved the highest rewards. For all of my violations against the laws of man and God, I deserve the harshest punishment. Look at me where I am today and tell me, does God exist?